President Trump invited lawmakers to the White House Tuesday to talk immigration, and we got a rare extended look inside the negotiating room. Republicans and Democrats sat down with the president to discuss a solution for dreamers, undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children. Major Garrett has the story.
Because this should be a bipartisan bill. This should be a bill of love. Truly, it should be a bill of love, and we can do that.
Seated with Republican and Democratic lawmakers, President Trump called for bipartisan immigration legislation. In an unusual move, cameras were allowed to film for nearly an hour.
We're all going to have to give a little, and I'll be the first one willing to.
Republicans zeroed in on 4 priorities: border security, ending the visa lottery, limiting immigration based on family ties, and DACA. The Obama-era program ended by Mr. Trump that provided legal status to undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children. California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein tempted the president with a bill that would only deal with DACA.
What about a clean DACA bill now, and with a commitment that we go into a comprehensive immigration reform?
For a moment, Mr. Trump appeared willing.
We're going to come out with DACA. We're going to do DACA, and then we can start immediately on the phase 2, which would be comprehensive.
Then House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, mindful of conservative opposition, redirected the president.
Mr. President, you need to be clear, though. I think what Senator Feinstein's asking here, when we talk about just DACA, we don't want to be back here 2 years later. You have to have security, as the Secretary would tell you.
But I think that's what she's saying.
I think she's saying something different.
What do you think I'm saying?
I'm thinking you're saying DACA without security.
But Mr. Trump seemed to be in a mood to make a deal, pressing the lawmakers to go further.
If we do this properly, DACA, you're not so far away from comprehensive immigration reform. And if you want to take it that further step, I'll take the heat. I don't care.
He did renew his calls for a border wall.
I'd love not to build the wall, but you need the wall.
Afterward, the number 2 House Democrat, Steny Hoyer, left the door open.
And we are prepared to work with the president on border security, which means many things to many people.
Approving DACA will expose the president to charges that he's sold out his political base, and that's why the White House is trying to drive a hard bargain on other immigration issues. The president, as you just heard, said he can take the heat. Congress is about to find out if that's true. Elaine?
Well, Major, speaking of heat, we are already seeing blistering criticism on social media, on the Breitbart News website, for instance, over the president's willingness to negotiate on this issue. It's being framed as amnesty, as you well know, having covered this issue of immigration. I wonder if you have a sense at all about how confident the White House is about holding on to President Trump's core base.
The president is confident that in the end he can do this, but the criticism you're seeing of this White House is a reflection of those on the activist side of the president's base, specifically on immigration, hearing things today that rattled them to their core. Not only that DACA, which is an Obama-era executive action, would be codified in law, and those who qualify, about 800,000, would either have permanent legal status or quite possibly a path to citizenship. That has always, for those hardliners and the conservative movement on immigration, been dubbed amnesty. Then they heard the president say, well, we're open to comprehensive immigration reform, and the White House today, through Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the Daily Briefing, did not rule out and didn't even push back on the idea that comprehensive immigration reform might include a path to citizenship for the 11, 12, or estimated 14 million undocumented immigrants in the country now. For hardliners in the conservative and Republican Party, conservative movement and Republican Party, these developments today make them deeply concerned about what the president might actually do on immigration. Could he be someone who could embrace, according to their terminology, amnesty? And if he does, no matter how high the border wall is, if it's ever built, they will consider that selling out his political base and will attack him relentlessly for that. So this is potentially dangerous terrain for the president politically. But this president does believe if he drives a hard bargain and eliminates chain migration or diminishes it, that's what bringing other family members in for one legal immigrant, or the visa lottery, and gets a lot of money for the border wall, he can turn to his base and say, DACA's approved, We did that. We had to do that. I told you I was going to do that, but look at what else I got. And it will be up to the president and his unique approach to social media and other means of communication to sell that deal if that is actually what the deal ultimately turns out to be.
It was so fascinating to watch the negotiations playing out on tape that had happened just moments before that tape was fed out, and to hear the president change his position in real time that way. Republican Senators Grassley, Cornyn, and Graham reiterated that they will not produce a bill that the president won't sign. As you noted, there was some clarification a bit by Sarah Sanders, but do we know the extent of the president's flexibility when it comes to immigration reform?
We do not know the extent of the president's flexibility. We do know, after a lot of give and take, much of which was captured by the cameras in there and the audio of that nearly hour-long session, that the president wants the 4 priorities just outlined. But that is not what Democrats thought they heard from the president when they came out and talked to us moments after the meeting. Congressional Democrats said it's going to be 2 phases, and DACA's phase 1 and all those other things are phase 2. That's not comprehensive immigration reform. Some Democrats also said, and we think we're going to get this done by January 19th. We think the president's on board with that. The White House and congressional Republicans had a completely different interpretation of the deadline and what is even going to be negotiated now. And one thing I would say about what we saw today, it was kind of a negotiation, but it was mostly fencing, back and forth, prodding to see what the president would be willing to accept, what he might be open to. And there's just that fascinating exchange we just showed where Dianne Feinstein, let's remember, running for re-election in California just a month ago, received a lot of heat about her aggressiveness on the DACA/immigration question. So she needs to prove herself to somewhat skeptical members of her own party in California on this issue. So she tries to tempt the president with his DACA-only idea. He appears willing to go for it. And then the House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy essentially slams that door shut, or at least tries to, in the presence not only of every potential negotiator, but about 25 reporters. Now, from my vantage point, Elaine, and every reporter who comes into this building every day, that's beautiful stuff. We love it. We could not be happier. We would say to the White House, do that every single day.
Absolutely.
Let America see what this looks like and sounds like. It was a fascinating exchange. And even though it wasn't the ultimate negotiation, the country, if it watches all 55 minutes of that, will have a much better idea of where the president may or may land and what others are trying to get him to accept as a part of this very important issue.
I'm with you, Major. I was riveted, and I told everyone, if you haven't watched it, you must watch the entire thing, essentially lifting the curtain on the swamp. All right, let me ask you about another topic before we let you go. Former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon is stepping down as executive editor of the conservative website Breitbart News after those comments Bannon made about the president's son, which were published in that book, Fire and Fury, by Michael Wolff. Has there been a reaction privately or publicly at the White House regarding that?
Not a public reaction that I'm aware of. I've been busy doing other things, but I guarantee you this White House is not displeased with this development. This White House made it very clear to one of the largest funding sources of Breitbart News, Rebecca Mercer, daughter of her father, Robert Mercer, a big supporter of President Trump during the campaign and a longtime supporter of Breitbart News, that this White House would very much prefer the Mercer family, and Robert Mercer had already done this. Rebecca Mercer did it last week. Pull up your stakes. Get out of your financial involvement in Breitbart News as a way to punish Steve Bannon for the comments he made about members of the Trump family, Don Jr., Ivanka, and Jared, in the book Fire and Fury. And it seems almost as night follows day that with the removal of that financial support from Rebecca Mercer, Steve Bannon has stepped down. One can theorize, I haven't had time today to do any independent reporting on this, but one can theorize that in order to have a conversation about Rebecca Mercer possibly coming back in as a financial supporter of Breitbart News, Steve Bannon's departure was part of that potential matrix. We shall see. But this White House made it clear last week Steve Bannon was persona non grata, cannot come back into the good graces of the president or anyone in his senior team here. Not only that, Breitbart News ought to lose the financial support of Rebecca Mercer if Steve Bannon stays, and even with him still there, lost the financial support. And if it's ever going to come back, Bannon had to depart. Now he has. We'll see what the next turn of this story is as far as the financial arrangements in the future between the Mercer family and Breitbart.
Never a shortage of things to talk about with you, Major. Major Garrett at the White House. Major, thanks very much.
Sure.